What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some reasons why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G. Now, don't get me wrong, this is actually a pretty good phone for what it is, but like any phone, it has plenty of drawbacks, and despite giving us a pretty good amount of value for the money, this device is really not going to make sense for everyone. So I'm going to be going over my least favorite things about it to give you a better idea of what you can actually expect if you get it. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and in case you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So my first reason why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is the display quality. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.52-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 269, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. Now on one hand, the size and dimensions we're getting here are actually pretty good. At 6.52 inches, the display is decently large, and with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience, and things are going to look a little bit more cinematic. And when you're doing your reading, web browsing, social media, stuff like that, with a taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. That being said though, if you're consuming a lot of content, the image quality might leave a little bit to be desired. Now don't get me wrong, it's not terrible, and for a lot of people, it is going to be perfectly fine. But if you're really doing a lot of stuff like watching videos, looking at photos, or maybe playing a game, when you're doing something where the image quality really matters a lot, although this 720p display really doesn't look bad for what it is, if you're really going to be consuming a lot of content, you might want to get a phone with a 1080p resolution instead. Now granted, in this price range, there aren't really a ton of phones that have 1080p resolutions, and in general, as a more affordable entry-level 5G phone, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 isn't really meant for prolonged use like that. But at the same time, if that's really what you're going to be doing with your phone, you might want to consider spending a little bit more and getting a slightly higher end device that has a better display. My second reason why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is because it doesn't have wireless charging. Now on one hand, do I really expect this feature in a phone like this? Definitely not. Even at this point at the beginning of 2023, we're still not seeing very many phones besides flagship phones that have wireless charging. But that being said, keep in mind, there is another version of this phone, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro, that does have wireless charging. And as you can see here, even side by side, these two phones actually do look pretty similar. So despite of course being completely different phones, I could definitely see how it might be easy to confuse the two. So just keep in mind, if you do end up getting the regular T-Mobile Revvl 6, expecting this phone to have wireless charging like the Revvl 6 Pro does, you are going to be disappointed because again, while the Revvl 6 Pro does actually have wireless charging, which is impressive in its own right, unfortunately, the regular T-Mobile Revvl 6 doesn't. Now my third reason why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is the camera setup. While the slightly more expensive Pro version of this phone does actually have a really good camera, the regular T-Mobile Revvl 6 maybe not so much. With this phone, we're getting a 5 megapixel front-facing camera, then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, first of all, this phone doesn't have an ultra wide camera, which in this day and age is more or less an expectation for any phone that has a good camera. In addition to this, when it comes to the photo quality, while it's not terrible, it's definitely still not the best. So if you're taking a lot of photos and the camera is more of a priority for you, I would definitely recommend getting the Revvl 6 Pro instead, because despite having a relatively small price difference, I think it's like $50 more, the Revvl 6 Pro does have a much better camera setup with a lot more features and a much more powerful camera in general. So the bottom line here is, if you're taking a lot of photos and the camera is more of an important feature for you, then this is probably not going to be the phone for you. But that being said, on the other hand, if you're really just more of an occasional camera user and maybe you want to get a nice photo every now and then, but you don't need the absolute best quality or a ton of different features, then despite again definitely not being the best option even for an entry-level phone, the camera we're getting here with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 will at least get the job done. My fourth reason why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 is because it doesn't have NFC. Now this is more of a significant drawback to me, because now that we're in 2023, contactless mobile payments, which you do need NFC to do, are becoming more and more popular and widely used. And while at this point, tap and pay still isn't something that everyone uses, I definitely think it is popular enough to the point where not having NFC is a much bigger deal than it used to be. At this point, I've even seen plenty of $100 phones that still have NFC. So the bottom line here is, not having NFC is definitely a significant drawback, especially considering this is a 5G device. But that being said, of course, if you never use tap and pay, then this obviously won't even matter to you. But even then, if you're really trying to get the best value and features for the money, then it still is something to think about. My fifth reason why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is the design. Now on one hand, it doesn't look terrible, and as far as the materials go, I actually am a big fan. A lot of phones in this price range are made of a really cheap plastic, but this phone, despite being made entirely of plastic like pretty much every entry-level phone, the plastic feels really high quality and sturdy, the build quality is good, and in general, the phone does have a decent amount of weight to it. That being said though, this design is something we've seen time and time again. Pretty much every phone in this price range is gonna look almost exactly the same. And while on one hand, probably not a whole lot of people are really looking for aesthetics, getting that same look over and over again, that really thick bottom bezel and the water drop notch front facing camera definitely does get old after a while. So if you're looking for a phone with more of an interesting design, then in general, while it doesn't really look bad for what it is, this phone is probably still not gonna be it. The sixth reason why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is because it doesn't have stereo audio. Now this is definitely not going to be a big deal for everyone, because if you use headphones all the time anyway, or maybe you're not really consuming a lot of content to begin with, in that kind of situation, you most likely won't even notice this. But if you do occasionally like to watch a video, play a game, or maybe listen to music out loud, and you don't always want to use headphones or an external speaker, then keep in mind, unfortunately, when you're doing any of that stuff, sound only comes out of the main speaker and not the earpiece. So in general, it's not going to sound nearly as good as a phone that does have stereo audio. Now, all this being said, everyone's standards are a little different, and while I personally don't think the audio quality we're getting here is really very good, it might be okay for you, but I'm gonna play a sample so you can see for yourself. So again, definitely a little subjective. You might like the quality, you might not, but no matter what, again, definitely keep in mind, this phone does not have stereo audio, and when you're playing media, sound is only going to come out of the main speaker and not the top. So if you are consuming a lot of content, definitely keep this in mind. And finally, the seventh reason why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G is because it doesn't have any dust and water resistance. Now don't get me wrong, this phone is no less durable than any other average entry-level phone. In fact, because of the build quality, it might be even a little bit more durable. But that being said, if you're maybe outside a lot, or in any environment that has more dust and water than usual, just keep in mind, compared to a higher end phone, this phone is definitely going to go bad a lot more easily. And because of this, if you are in that kind of environment, or honestly in any situation for that matter, I do recommend pairing this phone up with a case, because like any phone in this price range, while the build quality is still above average, compared to a higher end phone with more premium materials, the wear and tear is going to show quite a bit faster. But those were my reasons why you might not want the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G. In general, despite these drawbacks, and despite the fact that the Pro version is just so much better, which I will be talking all about in a different video, I do think that for what it is, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 5G does still provide a decent amount of value for the money. And if you're looking for a really basic entry-level 5G phone that may not necessarily be anything special, but still is going to get the job done just fine, then this phone is definitely still worth considering. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this device, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Khalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.